One game is an aberration, two games a pattern, as we welcome in Dan Hope from the 11warriors.com. And Dan, after a clunker, if you will, against Penn State, another closer than expected game at Nebraska, same issues popped up, trouble in the red zone, trouble rushing the ball. Is this a pattern, or is it just simply two clunkers against two pretty good opponents?
Yeah, I think you said it well. I think you looked at it one game. We talked about it last week. I said I wasn't too concerned about, the red zone issues that we saw against Penn State because it really hadn't been a trend for the rest of a season. But to see it happen two games in a row, that is a pattern. So I do think there's legitimate reason for concern about the fact that we've now seen it here, that two games in a row, Ohio State has not been able to finish off drives consistently. They have not been able to consistently move the ball on the ground. And those are things here as they continue to try to get through November undefeated and to ultimately, if they can win out the rest of these games, if they're ultimately going to try to make a run in the college football playoff, that's something you have to be able to do. You have to score touchdowns when you're down in the opposing territory, and you have to be able to move the ball on the ground. And so I think those are two areas that certainly need to be better than they've been in these last two games.
I think offensive line might be the least understood, most misunderstood position in all of football. People think you just need to have big, beefy guys up front who can slam people around. There's a lot of technique. There's a lot of chemistry that goes involved with that. And I think the fact that you essentially have four tackles and a center, you don't necessarily have any guards on that offensive line. I think that's been an issue all season. They were able to paper over it against some defenses that weren't quite as talented. But against Penn State and Nebraska, I think the lack of guards came back to bite them a little bit.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting here that, really since the Rutgers game, we haven't seen a game where they've just used the same starting five offensive linemen the whole game. They've been doing this rotation week in and week out. And when Ryan Day was asked about it on Tuesday, he was asked at this point, do you need a best five? And he quickly dismissed it and said no. But I don't know. I don't know if I agree with him on that. I do think that, based on what we've seen the last couple of weeks, that it does seem like something's amiss on that offensive line. And I do question whether this continuing to rotate guys in and out of the lineup, because I don't think there's one, specific weak link. Like sometimes if an offensive line is struggling, you can point to one or two players and say, that's the weak link that teams are attacking. I don't think it's that. I don't think there's any one player in that group of six, including Matt Jones, who's playing poorly. It just seems like they're just not quite where they need to be right now. And I think they've got to figure out, okay, what's going to make this unit click the way it's supposed to, because it is a very talented group. I mean, all these guys are very talented, but like you said, you've got two tackles playing guard, you've got guys moving around positions in between games. I think that makes it harder for guys to really be able to perform up to their full ability.
Another question about this offense is how much is the quarterback supposed to run? How much is C.J. Stroud actually running? We heard from Kevin Wilson on Tuesday saying with the shoulder injury that they've wanted to protect C.J. Stroud. They wanted to minimize his contact to keep him healthy as possible. But that has become a major topic of conversation because if you've got the quarterback running even 4 or 5 more times a game, that's going to make that run-pass balance look a little bit better on paper.
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting topic and one that I know a lot of fans feel very passionately about. The line that we've gotten from Ryan Day pretty consistently is that he thinks CJ Stroud is making good decisions with the ball. And so I don't think Ohio State necessarily wants him to be running more than it is. I think, as Kevin Wilson said today, I think the fact that he has been battling a shoulder injury probably has something to do with that. But I do think it's a very fair and real question of, if they run the ball a little bit more with CJ, will that keep defenses more honest? Because I think right now they're just not worried about CJ Stroud as a running threat. And I think if you look at these last couple of years, they weren't calling many designed runs for Justin Fields, but the fact that you knew at any time he could take off and make a big play with his legs, that kept defenses honest. You had to constantly account for that threat, and that helped open things up in both the passing game and the running game. Whereas I think right now, defenses are not worried about that threat with CJ Stroud. And I think kind of like we saw in 2018, which even Ryan Day acknowledged was a valid comparison on Tuesday, without having that running threat from a quarterback position, it takes a little something away from what's otherwise a very talented offense.
Staying at the quarterback position, late last week, third-string quarterback Jack Miller arrested, cited for operating a vehicle while impaired, OVI charge. So my question for you, he was suspended for the Nebraska game. He's going to remain suspended until, as Ryan Day put it, we have more information. Will we ever see Jack Miller in an Ohio State uniform again?
Yeah, it's a hard one because I hate speculating on transfers, but at the same time, you're talking about a quarterback room here that is pretty crowded with, four guys who still have several years of eligibility. And I think, Jack's a guy who certainly is going to have to make a decision on that front after this season because of the fact that he'd most likely be waiting his turn for at least another year. He's already fallen behind Kyle McCord as well. And then we also heard on Tuesday that Quinn Ewers has been making strides. And so with a guy like Jack Miller, I don't know what Ohio State's going to necessarily decide on that front with Jack Miller. We saw with Marcus Hooker early in the year that he was welcomed back to the team after serving a suspension for an OVI arrest. So I don't necessarily expect that he's going to be dismissed from the team, but I do think that certainly if Jack was trying to position himself to move up the depth chart at Ohio State, this isn't something that's going to help his cause, and so it could be one more factor that gets into the equation as we get into the offseason and him having to decide what's best for his future.
Conspiracy theories are fun to talk about, and we certainly know the rabid Buckeye fan base loves to delve into a good conspiracy theory. One making the rounds this week is the Associated Press purposely left Purdue unranked this week as the spoiler makers, if you will, come to Columbus unranked. We know their great record against top 25 teams when they are unranked just last week, knocking off previously undefeated Penn State as Purdue is unranked, and now they're unranked taking on Ohio State.
Yeah, I don't think there was any conspiracy theory there, nor do I think being ranked or unranked is going to make any difference on this game. But certainly, you just look at what this Purdue team has done with those two massive upsets that they've pulled off this year. And that's enough right there to say if you're Ohio State, you cannot overlook this game. I mean, they should know just from 2018, you cannot overlook this game, what happened the last time Ohio State played Purdue. And so I think it should be pretty easy for Ryan Day to make sure that his team is focused for this one. Obviously, they've got two really big matchups coming up on the schedule in Michigan State and Michigan. But if you just look at the fact that the last two games have been struggles, and then you just look at what Purdue's doing, and this is a game you cannot overlook. Ohio State is favored by 20 points in this game right now, so Vegas doesn't seem to be buying that this is going to be another Purdue upset. But I think if you're Ohio State, you have to go into this game thinking anything's possible, and we've got to play our best football to win.
You look at the way both Penn State and Nebraska hurt Ohio State throwing the ball over the middle. You look at what Purdue has with David Bell, the way Aiden O'Connell is playing right now, and that to me is something Ohio State has to be very concerned about.
Absolutely. I think the pass defense for Ohio State has not been as bad as it was last year, but we did see them give up a couple big plays in the passing game against Nebraska. And I think this is going to be one of the biggest tests, it maybe even the biggest that Ohio State's pass defense has faced all year with the way that Purdue passing game has been clicking. And so I think this is going to be a huge test for the pass defense. I think the good thing that you like, if you look at this matchup on paper, is Purdue is dead last in the country in yards per carry. So I think Ohio State's run defense should be able to shut down Purdue on the ground, but I think the pass defense is going to be tested repeatedly in this game, and that could ultimately make the difference on whether Ohio State comes out of this game with a win.
And with the Ohio State running attack needing to get healthy, this Purdue front seven is not necessarily the front seven you want to try and get healthy against. This is a very stout Purdue front seven on defense.
Yeah, this is another really solid defense. Just looking at what they've done, I think they're ranked in the top 30 nationally right now. So this is another test for Ohio State. If Ohio State is going to get its groove back on offense, it's going to have to execute better. It's going to have to figure out what's gone wrong the last couple of weeks and fix those problems because the reality is, I think what's become more clear here over the last couple of weeks is if this Ohio State offense is really talented, there's still a chance that we could be saying this is the best offense in the country by the end of the season. But I think we've also realized that, okay, when they were beaten up on Rutgers and Maryland and Indiana, some of that had to do with the level of competition that they were facing. And now that they've been facing better defenses, they have not had that same kind of success. And so this is certainly going to be another test, and it'll be interesting to see if Ohio State can get things clicking again.
Ohio State's offense has struggled the last 2 weeks. It's cost them the #1 spot in the nation in terms of points per game, but now they're #2, just a tenth of a point behind Pittsburgh. I want to thank Dan Hope from 11warriors.com for joining us. Dan, thank you.
Yep, thanks for having me.